And good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. Welcome. Pull up a chair and join us for the Food Safety Chat. Every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, your host, myself, Bryan of the Food Leadership, gets together with you and we go over a food safety topic, things that are of interest to the industry, and I bring in experts in this field. And one of the things, if you're new to this, number one is welcome. We love having you here. And that's the fun of this. This is a live stream, and this is on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other venues where you can interact with other people in the chats. You can interact and ask us questions, and we prefer questions. So please ask us questions. My assistant, Renee, is on. Good morning, Renee. And we are here to help because, as you know, food safety is not a point of competition. This is something that involves us all because if one company fails in a particular area, it impacts everybody within those areas. So one of the things, and Don is on the ball today. Good morning, Don, in Allentown, PA. I used to live in Lancaster. So let us know where you're at in the world. And it's always amazing when you see this, when we open up the chat, right? I'm in Loveland, Colorado, which is a little north of Denver. It's up by Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And Austin Welsh, my esteemed guest today, the co-founder of Sage Media, is down a little closer to the Denver area, but we're not too far apart.
Mm-hmm.
And today I think it's going to be a gorgeous day here in Colorado. I think, forecast is 82 degrees and sunny. Can't beat that for July 1st.
Yep. Heading out to the mountains this weekend.
And that's if you're from Colorado, that can be kind of a difficult thing because there's only a few routes into the mountains. And so everybody likes to go to the mountains. So you can end up with a really bad traffic. And so people a lot of times will strategically try and time that. It's like, okay, I do not want to go back down I-70 on Sunday afternoon. It's going to be a parking lot. So people will kind of shift that around and try and change it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work too well. So we'll see on that side. So we have a gentleman, and I hate to do this because I'm going to absolutely destroy your name, sir, from Nigeria. Asa, what do you think, Austin? I'm going to throw you under the bus.
Osaji?
I think that's an excellent guess. Good morning. I've never been to Nigeria or the African continent. It's somewhere I would love to go. Our friend Bryan out in San Diego. Nice to see you, sir. Kim in Vegas. Good to see you as well. Tammy's here. So one of the things, guys, that you'll notice here, and Cheryl, of course, thank you for coming. One of the things that you'll notice here, guys, is if you're new to this, we're developing a community, right? A core of people who are here every week for these conversations, and it's absolutely amazing. And we really appreciate you taking the time out to do this. The live streams are recorded and they're available on LinkedIn in your feeds after the fact. But as you'll find, being able to interact live and ask questions of what we're going over, super valuable. So today's conversation, I think, is one, Austin, that's on the minds of everybody, right?
I think so. Yeah. We see a lot of talk around. Anybody who follows me on LinkedIn sees that this is something that I consistently talk about, which is how do we continually simplify this topic of food safety culture so that we can start to plug away at it and make improvements within each of our respective institutions and organizations, break it down to its simplest parts so that we can get going on getting past the philosophical what it is and why it's important and talk about where the rubber meets the road and how to start implementing some change.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's an important thing because one of the things in life that is sometimes derided and looked at kind of funny is habits and things like this. But what we don't realize is that habits and how we do things are extremely important because imagine every morning if we had to hunt for our toothbrush and we don't remember where we put our pants from the night before, right? And we spend our whole day and we find our pants in the backyard hanging in a tree, which may or may not have happened to me at some point in the past. But routine helps us make things more efficient. And one of the routines that we have here on the Food Safety Chat is this. Join us for a drink of your favorite beverage. And the temptation is to say here in the morning, but for our friend in Nigeria who's invited us over, thank you. Please join us for your, I guess, afternoon beverage probably.
Also.
Nothing like a good cup of coffee in the morning. Gotta love that. And, and so Don said, my wife is still looking for Jif peanut butter. Yeah, well, yeah, good luck with that, right? That's ongoing. I haven't heard anything. No, slight segue on this. Has anybody heard anything new on the Jif recall? The last I heard was, some estimates around cost, which the last I heard, Austin, was around like what, $125 million.
Yeah, it was massive.
Yeah, so for a problem that was resident and something that people were seeing all the time. And I think, right, that's a really good example of what we're talking about today, which is food safety culture. And with that, right, trying to break these things down into smaller pieces that we can deal with, because I know from my experience, as a quality manager and working my way up and end up as the vice president of quality, these things don't change, Austin, right? Every day in these type of roles in food safety and food quality, you're absolutely inundated with all kinds of things that you need to do just to get through the day, right? It's, everything's on fire. There's a production line that's down. Sanitation didn't go well last night. Person quit on the floor, right? All these things have to be dealt with. And what I always used to teach my managers is that if you think that's your job, you're wrong, right? That's the things that keep you busy, but that's not your job. Your job is to make things better, right? That's what the plant is looking at you for. And figuring out this puzzle of food safety culture is an important piece of that. And part of this advice, and this is something that Austin and I were talking about as we were preparing for this live stream, is how do you break things down, right? It's a difficult thing, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and like you were talking about running around with all the things, the line that comes to mind is, if you don't control your day will control you.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the food safety culture conversation, is putting together your own plan and your own strategy, and you owning that approach as opposed to the approach owning you. But yeah, and because it's such a massive topic, I mean, we're 20 years in and we're still talking about what it is. And but what I think is great about what we're going to talk about today is that we're going to dive into, GFSI put out this position paper on food safety culture a few years ago and really laid out a really well structured platform of, this is what it is. Here's the things that we should be looking for in analyzing our own internal culture, and some of the things we can start to do to improve that.
Yep, absolutely. And if you hang around for this live stream, so Renee, as you'll notice here, he'll put in some quotes. He also puts in links to different information. And one of these is the link to this actual paper if you don't have it. So stick around to the end and we'll link that up in there for you. But what I love about the white paper they put together on this topic is it helps to break it down, right? Because that's part of the problem. Right, we've all heard the saying, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And you have to figure out where you're going to start, right? I'm going to start on the ears, the trunk, the foot. Where you got to tackle it somewhere, right? So what's your game plan for that? And this kind of led us to a conversation around epistemology. And so for people who don't know, in philosophy, there's kind of 5 pillars with that as well. And one of those pillars of philosophy is epistemology, and that is the process of thinking. How do we think? What tools do we use? How do we get to the conclusions we get to? And there's a really good story around this that I learned in my past called the crow epistemology. And there was an experiment that took place with crows in this kind of this enclosed area. And there was this, murder, right? It's a murder of crows as a bunch of crows that they would have up in this trees. And there was a central clearing where they would put some food in the middle. And, one of the researchers would come in and put food for the crows in the morning in the middle of this open space. And the crows, they kind of sit there and they watch, and then they see the person leave, and they're like, okay, it's now safe for us to fly down and get the food. So they would fly down and chow down. So they would do this every day, and they would have one person come out, and then one day 2 people came in and brought the food, and the crows are like, oh, this is a little different. And 2 people left, and they're like, okay, that's cool. And they flew down. Well, the next day, 2 people came in, but only 1 left. One kind of hid in the sides, but didn't fool the crows, right? They're like, okay, I saw 2 people come in and only 1 left. I ain't flying down. That's he's going to get me, right? So they refused to fly down. So they repeated this methodology, and they would do like 3 people and 4 people, and they would mess with the variables and things like this. And they got to 5 people. And then the crows were kind of a little unsure. So 5 people would enter and 4 would leave. And in their mind, they're like, oh, okay, everybody left. And they would fly down, thinking that that person who was hiding there wasn't there. So what's the importance of this story from a thinking standpoint? It's that you can only hold so many concepts in your mind, right? So for the crows, counting was 1, 2, 3, 4, many, right? So once you got past that point, it was a jumble. You can only hold so much things, and we're exactly the same. And the reason we've succeeded as a species is we were able to create concepts, right? We were able to take really complex things and drill it down into something really simple, right? So the example I use is this, right? We all know what this number is, right? And what this represents. But in reality, it's 10 of these and 3 more of these, right? Imagine having to flash this up every time you wanted to talk about a number, right? Your mind is overwhelmed by that. And you have to remember that. You can only hold so many things. I read a really great book, and it's still got legs, right? It's been around for a while, but it's still a really good book on organizing. It's by David Allen, and it's called Getting Things Done. And his point in there is exactly what we're talking about. If you flood your email and you leave everything in your inbox, you can't keep track of it, right? Because you have to keep going back and looking at the same stuff. It's like, oh, that's right. I have to give Austin a call. Oh, that's right. I have to write that paper for the guy in R&D. Oh, that's right. And your mind gets caught in this loop because you can only hold so many concepts. And why am I boring everybody with this? Well, the reason is this, is that food safety culture is exactly the same, right? It's this abstract concept that we haven't figured out how to break down into manageable units that we can digest, right? Just like the elephant. And so I think, yeah, kudos to GFSI in putting this together. And so part of what we wanted to do here today is give a little introduction to this and some of our thoughts around the 5 pillars and how you can start on this. So how's that? Is that a pretty good introduction? Does that make sense? Or
I think it's great, man. Yeah.
All right. Let's slap this dude up here. So hopefully this works. This worked earlier. Hey, all right.
Look at that.
So out of this paper, which is 50 some pages long, but don't let that scare you, because a big chunk of that at the end is references and definitions and all these type of things. It's an easy read, this document. Mm-hmm. So in here, guys, what you're seeing is the 5 different pillars. And so you have, it's a little blurry here with the context, but I think everybody can read it, hopefully. If not, I'm going to read it as we go along. And don't worry, we're not going to touch every single box here. So vision and mission, people, consistency, adaptability, and hazards and risk awareness. I just got a flashback here. It looks like the Jeopardy board, doesn't it? I'll take. I
never thought of that. I'll take stakeholders for 200.
Yes, and the question is yes, and so we'll start on this from left to right, and so with the vision piece of it, and this is something, Austin, I'd love to get your take on this too, is that vision and mission for me is something in my career in the business world that has just frustrated the snot out of me, because it was always such an abstract concept, right? You end up with these, mission and vision statements that, the senior leadership puts together at some big offsite where they go to Scottsdale and they golf for a while. And then they come back and they come down from the mountaintop with the tablets and give everybody the vision and mission. And they pretty much all read the same, right? It's like, here at our world-class fill in the blank, we break paradigms by, right, whatever. And you read this thing and you're like, what? How does that apply to what I do, right? There's this giant disconnect, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen this a lot with, there's some really great examples of mission statements out there, and there's some really horrible ones. And even within vision and mission, since for those of us who work in extremely large organizations, global organizations, where we might not have the ability to really influence the existing vision and mission statement, looking at what is the vision and mission within my domain, my fiefdom, what is the vision and mission within my department? Because really the vision and mission, it communicates why we exist. What is the reason for the company? What is the reason for the department? What is the reason for the work that I do on a daily basis? And for those of pretty much everybody on the call today is primarily focused on food safety. And so, but creating that and documenting, those statements so that we know exactly where we're going. And that's a big part of for me, for food safety culture is documenting this stuff. Just like we have to document all the other processes and procedures, same thing with food safety culture, documenting what our actual strategy and our vision is for that, for food safety culture enhancement is really important, just as important as the overall vision and mission of the company.
Well, that's a good point too, right? Because if you're part of a large multinational conglomerate that's making all kinds of different stuff, the mission statement for the overall company has to be abstract because you can't possibly cover what everybody is doing. So then how can you break that down to your division, right? And all the way down. And that's something that I used to do, right? Is look at those mission and vision statements for the company and then say, okay, what's the goal for the operational group? All right, great. What's the goal for the quality group? What's the goal for the directors within the quality group? And what's the goal for all of the individuals within those teams? Because then you have to sit down every quarter or what have you for your reviews and link those things up. Because if you're not doing that, how do you know you're heading the right way? And to your point, Austin, which I think is a great one, I want to reemphasize this, is that food safety is assumed, right? It's just assumed that we're not going to have recalls and these type of things. But it's, as we all know, it's exceptionally hard work to keep that scenario from happening. Just, as we talked about earlier, just ask Jeff, right? These things are not to be taken for granted. How do you build those in?
Should change the saying to, what assume means. It means you're going to get a recall.
Exactly, right? And so part of this then too links to behavior and how we share information and how we look at things. And we all look at people around us and say, okay, they're saying one thing, but they're doing something else, right? And when that happens, all credibility is gone. We've all worked for people. I had an exceptional boss in my past career who's, once he said something, that was all you needed to hear, right? Because you knew that he was going to follow through on that. And that consistency is extremely important in food safety and food quality. I used to tell my teams that I should be consistent enough in my behavior that if something happens, you know what I'm going to say before it comes out of my mouth, right? And once we get to that point, we know that we're being consistent.
And that ties into this column, right? The third one down, you have leadership and messaging. So that consistent messaging, and a lot of the stuff that a lot of y'all are already doing falls into this category, right? And that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of like bring to light with this graphic is that most people on the call today will look at this and be like, yeah, none of this is new information. I've seen these things before. So that's great. So to remove that veil over the, secrecy of food safety culture, to be able to look at this and say, this is stuff that we've already been looking at, we've already been thinking about, we've already been working on, but it's just looking at it from a slightly different angle. Right. But the leadership and messaging is, how are we communicating with people? Is it posters? Is it group huddles? Is it, and then we get into the next section, around training and development and things like that, but keeping that consistent messaging across the board specifically for food safety.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, this is something that if you're new to the chat, this is something I bring up quite a bit, is that the skill set we need to develop in what we do is just not technical, right? It's not being a good microbiologist or understanding all the different quality schemes and systems and really being good at the technical piece. It's the people side of things. And that includes managing your teams and the people above you, right? So if your information and your messaging around food safety is not getting to senior leadership, that's a huge mistake, right? You need to figure out methodologies within your company of how those systems work. But again, though, always remember, this is a team effort, right? Don't feel, and a lot of times in quality, Austin, people think this, is that we need to take this on ourselves, right? No, we need to lead the effort. right? This is not a singular effort. You cannot build a food safety culture in quality and not have it anywhere else. It's not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that gets back to the concept around building a food safety coalition, right? Because when we talk about this, as you can see from the image, the culture touches on every single department. So we need representatives. We need voices from all those departments. One of the big things that I'm talking to a lot of companies about recently is turnover and how culture leads to either turnover or, on the positive side, retention. And so that's a conversation with HR, with leadership. How do we make sure that we're recruiting the right people? How are we setting expectations properly through the onboarding process of what safety behaviors look like, and then bringing them into the fold, and then making sure that they are empowered to actually execute for those food safety behaviors once they're in their role. So when we're looking at the coalition, right, we need someone from HR. When we're looking at, we can get into elements around finance. You talk about procurement a lot, right? And just the fiasco that the procurement could bring into the safety of the food. Mergers and acquisitions, that's a huge topic of discussion with a lot of my clients, is that they're buying companies, and sometimes there's not a lot of great due diligence in assessing these companies. And so they've kind of gone in, thrown their toys under the bed, cleaned up everything so that it looks good for mom to come into the bedroom. And then, once the purchase goes through, then you find out what you're really dealing with, which then leads to food safety issues and affects your culture.
Exactly, right. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when mergers and acquisitions take place, they only look at the financials and say, okay, is this making money? Is this something we can fit into our portfolio? And you go to the room where they have all the documentation and you review those things. And a lot of times the food safety questions are not even brought up. You need to go out and evaluate those things. And that's something, as Austin's talking about, that we've done in the past. And it's eye-opening for that leadership team. And it needs to make sure that the mission and vision of the company remain consistent as well, right? If it's not in your mission, if you're looking at buying a company that's outside of your core competency, oh man, is that a huge mistake. If you're a cheese manufacturer and you're looking at buying a hot dog company, you are going to fail. You're going to fail. You don't know that business. And risks are going to go up tenfold. And the organization needs to understand that. Right? And that kind of segues nicely over into the people side of things, because there's an interesting rule. And Austin, this links back into the Crow epistemology, is you can only handle so many concepts. Well, guess what? You can only manage so many people. So even at the senior leadership level in a company, right, you have the board of directors and you have the CEO. And CEO, and this is something people sometimes get confused. The CEO is the boss. Kind of, right? The CEO is the person who is put in charge of executing the objectives of the company set by the board of directors, right? So the board of directors gives the marching orders to the CEO, and the CEO executes against those orders. The CEO then generally has, it's been my experience, and I haven't really seen any documentation on this, so this is just anecdotal, but generally, if you have more than 6 or so people reporting to you, it's too much, right? You're the Crow epistemology, right? It's too many, too much. So generally the CEO will have like the operations vice president, the marketing and sales person, procurement, legal, communications, and maybe somebody else, marketing reporting in through that group. And that's it, right? And then under them, they have their key reports. They're like senior vice presidents, directors, what have you, and on down through the management. And what's interesting of this as well, Austin, is the corollary of that. Well, guess what? Even if I'm the vice president of quality assurance at a giant company, I have my structure, but those are the only people who report to me. Nobody else does. Right? Every other group within that organization, so let's say at its max, right? If you count the people in the plants and those type of things, 5% of the individuals in the organization have a linkage to the quality group. That's 95% that you don't control. You have to be able to work with these people and figure out, and this goes back to the vision and mission, right? You have to have this commonality between these different sources, because like it or not, right? I can't go to the senior vice president of procurement and say, you have to do this. He'd be like, no, I don't. Right? You're not my boss, right? So time and time again, and you hear it on this food safety chat all the time, there's technical skills and there's interrelational people skills. And those are just as important, right? If you're going to get anything done, you have to be able to go to the procurement group and explain to them why it's in their interest and why it's in the interest of the company. Critical, absolutely critical.
And that's exactly what that the first category under people, stakeholders, is talking about is do your stakeholders all understand their role within food safety culture? If not, and so as we're going through these things, what I'm hoping is that some people will be like, yep, that's the thing that we definitely need to be working on in our organization, so we can hone in on that. So I would love to hear from some of you as we're going through these. Is like, do any of these strike a chord with you? Because as we said with the eating an elephant, it's like, here's all the different elements of said elephant. Where do you want to start, so that you don't have to tackle it all at once? But the stakeholders definitely ties into that, creating the coalition and communicating the importance of food safety in and throughout the organization, which is part of that definition by GFSI. Is about it's the values and the beliefs in and throughout the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is on that people side, right, we have a box here, governance. And within our industry, right, we have FDA, USDA, different governmental bodies, right? But of course, governance is other things as well. But I wanted to bring up the FDA one in particular, right? So we have Frank Yanis from Walmart, right, who's written books on culture and things like this. And he's doing something very interesting. And I think this kind of ties into a topic that we've monitored in our industry quite a bit too, which is FDA's guidance that is currently out around enhanced traceability. So I think that's a perfect example of how governance is looking at the industry and saying, you've got to do better. So what do I mean by that? So with the enhanced traceability, what FDA is essentially saying is, okay, if there's a food safety crisis, going backwards through the supply chain is crazy, right? We can't figure out, because of this complex web of interrelated distributors and brokers and logistics and warehouses and manufacturers and co-packers, where this stuff came from. It takes too long. And as a result, people get sick and die who don't have to. We want you to do better. But FDA is saying, not as individual companies, you need to look at this as a whole, right? So FDA is saying, back up, look at your industry. If you're in produce or dairy or whatever, how do you guys manage this? Oh, and hey, guess what? That primary source of that traceability, we're coming to you for that. So we want to be able to skip over the distribution portions. We want to come directly to you as quickly as we can. So FDA has said on that people side of things, this, it's not my problem once it leaves my plant, is unacceptable, right? So FDA is going in this very direction. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, and I think governance is an easier area to jump into, because this is an area that is familiar to a lot of people, because this is where we look at things like policies and standards, looking at specific risk and issues, risk management, but also getting into governance around, behaviors. So the GFSI paper addresses whistleblowing. The companies need to have some type of whistleblower policy in place, so that is an option on the table, which we've seen has been beneficial in some of these cases recently, specifically with Abbott.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Blue Bell's getting ready to go to court here pretty soon too. So, I mean, part of this too, right, is on that people side. You need to look at your organization. This includes you too. Is we've all heard the saying is responsibility and authority need to be linked. Meaning that if you have people in positions that have an incredible amount of responsibility, but they don't have the authority to act, that's a huge ticking time bomb, right? So if you tell employees on the floor, if you see something you don't like, or if there's something that's a risk, you need to let people know, but they don't have the ability to do that, or their supervisor shuts it down, man, that's a giant problem. So you need to root those things out and figure out where they're at, and that can be really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, and then moving to the next one with communication, and this is another one that I feel that people have a fairly good grasp on. We're looking at communication, things like posters, those meetings, those daily group meetings. Just how often is food safety a topic of conversation within, water cooler talk, emails that are going out, Slack boards, things like that. And because the more that we're talking about it, the more that we know that this is top of mind, and that we're keeping it within that realm of something that everybody is always thinking about. So the more we can maintain that communication. So what are those communication strategies that you might already be doing? Mentoring programs. This is a big one that I've been seeing recently, because we have kind of like the boomer exodus, right? A lot of the baby boomers are retiring, and unfortunately they're taking a lot of really great information with them. Yeah. So we need to find ways to transfer that information and that knowledge into the new workforce. So mentoring programs come into that element around communication. But even, creating, competitions and, awards and recognition, these kind of tie into that communication, because it communicates the value that the company places on food safety. How are you consistently showing that we do place an importance on it, not just through what we say, but actually what we do and how we run our business day to day?
Exactly. 100% right. And so part of what I would do as well, Austin, is I would try whenever I could to make things personal, right? Because food safety is managed by people. It's not managed by procedures. And
Yep.
One of the things, if I had the opportunity to talk with people in the plant, is I would say, hey guys, listen, I'm in corporate, right? I don't see the day-to-day of what you guys are going through. You're my eyes and ears. And if there's one thing you take away from what we're talking about today, it's this, is if you don't feel confident that you can take any product off of any line at any given time, take that home and feed it to your grandchildren that night, I want to know, right? Call me and let me know that. We need to know these things, and you're the team that knows that. So please be involved with that, right? And so being able to create those personal connections was huge, right? Because those are the warning points and those signs that help you make sure that crises don't happen.
Yeah, and that gets back to the communication of risk, right? So it's that everybody is able to understand and has communication points around the specific risk that is inherent within their specific role. So going back to the coalition, right? If I work in finance, I need to understand how the decisions that I make on a daily basis could potentially affect and risk our food, or affect the safety of the food.
Yep.
So that everybody within that, so communicating and throughout the entire organization, that risk factor that is associated with each individual role. Because as the food safety person, liaison, guru, you can't be at all places at all times. So people need to fully understand the risks that they bring to the table so that they can mitigate that.
Right. People, especially over time, become accustomed to things. And we see it on the safety side of things, right? So the teams in plants who are responsible for OSHA compliance and machine guarding and things like that understand this, right? Because they know that if I'm a machine operator and I'm running this press, right, that runs all the time, that danger associated with that, I become used to that, right? And human nature is, you know what? Oh, there's something stuck in the machine. I bet I could just reach in there and grab that. Right? Right? Because that risk value has been diminished in your mind, which is why they put those guards and those type of things in place. And it's the same with food safety, right? If a company hasn't had an issue, and we'll just say just out of pure dumb luck, right? there is a belief internally within the organization that they won't have an issue in the future, right? Past luck equals future success. And we all hear it in the phrase of, oh, we've never had a problem before. Right? What's the big deal? And that type of thinking is extremely dangerous, right? You will have a problem if you have that attitude.
Right. So yeah, and then that kind of leads into the next bucket, which is my personal favorite, because this is the specific world I work in, which is the learning organization. And I recently did a kind of like a breakdown series of videos that did kind of an overview of Frank Yanis's book of food safety equals behavior. And one of the things that he mentioned is that one of the biggest risks to food safety is the learning, the internal training. And the lack of internal training to effectively do its job. And there's another quote within the GFSI position paper. I think I have it right here. 62% of food safety respondents agreed that despite our efforts, we still have employees not following our food safety program on the plant floor. And this is where it gets into my mantra of knowledge does not equal behavior. Yes. And this is my life's work, is figuring out how to design training programs that don't just give people information, but actually leads to measurable behavior outcomes back on the job. And that's a constant, struggle for most companies, is how do we train our people in a way where they actually take this new knowledge and that new knowledge translates into new behaviors. And that's where, we were talking about philosophy earlier, and a lot of the work that I do is research around cognitive science. So this is sociology, philosophy, psychology, and figuring out how people tick and what motivates us to change. And so there's some really interesting research around that. But that's what we're always looking for within that learning organization, is that we're not looking just to educate people. We're looking for behavioral outcomes. So when we look at things around training our people, asking ourselves not what do they need to know, but what do they need to do? And is that behavior observable, and is it measurable? Because pretty much every behavior is observable and measurable in some way. But I always bring up measurable and observable because sometimes we think of behaviors, once again, as these nebulous concepts that is reserved for highfalutin psychologists to analyze. But it's like, no, I can see, did Austin take the cap off of the pen and then put the cap back on properly and then put the pen away? Yes, he did. That was very observable, and we can measure that. But I can I can obviously go on and on about the learning organization.
No, and I think you're hitting on something very important, and Mario mentioned it as well too with KPIs, right? Is maybe that's part of the reason why people are having difficulty getting their arms around this concept, right? Is because, again, they're taking this abstract idea and trying to figure out, how do I execute and measure against a standard, right? And I think that's what your team at Sage Media does a great job with.
Yeah, I think, and we were talking about this the other day. For me, for my brain, I have to break it down to its simplest parts. My gift or my curse is that I have that 5-year-old brain that goes, why, until I finally get to a root cause that I'm like, okay, now I understand what we're actually tackling and what we're addressing and what we're dealing with. Because as we go through that kind of Kaizen methodology of drilling down through those 5 whys, or sometimes 8 or 9 or 10, it gets to that root cause. And traditionally, when we look at food safety and food safety issues, there's a behavior somewhere along the way that did or did not happen. And so that, for me, is always what the role of training is to figure out how do I shift those behaviors so that we don't have that issue again.
Absolutely. And Sebastian had a question here. Let's see if we can tackle this. I want to hear from you guys on the impact of the social side of business on food safety culture. Can your underpaid workers care a lot about food safety culture? Right. So I think the gist of this, and Sebastian, correct me if I'm wrong here, is how do we make sure that everybody has a say? How do we make sure that the people side, the social side of things, is getting these messages out, right? Because having the pizza party, not really the way to do it, right? So any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts around that. And this gets back to, and unfortunately, it's an area that I personally don't have a lot of influence over. But if you've heard of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we look at the hierarchy of needs, there's the baseline elements of what is necessary for survival, right? Food, water, oxygen, then housing, and then respect, love, and respect from our our community, and it keeps moving up. And the theory goes that if you can't provide, if you don't have those baseline needs met, then it's hard to graduate to those higher level elements. And compassion and dedication to food safety within your day-to-day life, those base needs need to be met. And so when we talk about things about underpaid workers, I have strong opinions about that, and I feel that ultimately, no, you can't. If someone is not making enough money to live at a reasonable and respectable level, because the World Health Organization and different places look at not just like survival, but I can't remember the word that they use, but it's like survival and an element of like self-respect, right? So it's like, I need X amount of water to survive, but I need X amount of water per day to have some type of like self-respect or to feel that I am human, as opposed to
I've got 20 mils of water left over to brush my teeth, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so and this brings up a whole topic around temp labor, that I'm not a fan of temp labor because that introduces a new vector into your food safety culture that is hard to control. It's hard to bring foreigners into a culture and have them assimilate to that culture immediately. Culture is something that is built over time, and that we see people behaving in a certain way, and then we go, oh, I should be behaving that way as well. If I go to when I went to Italy, I had certain Americanisms that I had, and once I got to Italy, I started seeing like, oh, okay, like I'm going to drink my espresso at the bar with everybody else. I don't take it with me, enjoy the environment a little bit. When I go to dinner, this is going to be a 2-hour, 3-hour ordeal. It's not an in and out. The way that I greet people. So it's like I have to be immersed in that culture for a little bit to start to pick up the clues, and that's really hard with a temp. So temp workforce in a perfect world, I would say I wouldn't have it. And in a perfect world, everybody would be paid a livable wage, so that now they don't worry about those baseline needs of survival, so that they can focus on the higher. Because when we look at food safety, it's an evolution, right? We evolved from going way back. You eat raw meat, and then it's like, well, now we figured out that sometimes it needs to be cooked, and we need to purify water. So we're constantly evolving because those baselines are met.
Yes.
I don't know if that answered the question, or if that just put me on a soapbox for a little while.
No, let me reflect that back. And so some of the key things I pulled out of that from what you just said. So recently, Joe Lano was on, and we talked about maintenance. One of the most difficult groups in maintenance to control are contractors, right? Because they don't view themselves as part of the company. Hey, I'm just an electrician. I'm just here to put in some wires. I don't know about this food safety stuff you're doing, right? They need to be educated. As you just said, with the temp force as well, right? They're not viewed as part of the workforce, but they are, right? They are part of the workforce. So if they are, how can you include them? And how can you then give them incentives, right? Because part of this too is like, okay, if you do well in this temp job, is there an actual path forward? Can you become a full-time worker? Can you become part of the team? How are these type of things managed, right? There's all kinds of intricacies with that. And while you were talking as well, Austin, I made a kind of an interesting connection in my brain, is we talk about the hierarchy of needs, but guess what? Food safety is also set up on a hierarchy, right? We have our prerequisite programs, and then we have our preventive controls. The preventive controls are not going to work unless you're doing the basics around the prerequisites, right? If you don't have good GMPs, if you don't have all these programs, it's not going to work, right? And it's the same with the people side of things too. So how are you doing that? How are you setting up this organization?
Yeah.
So important points there. So next one is consistency, right? So one of the rules I had internally for myself is this goes back to the previous pillars, right? And you can see, guys, how these build upon themselves. So I had my team. I worked really, really hard to put together objectives that were lined up with the mission and vision. And if I didn't understand the mission and vision, I went up as far in the organization as I needed to find out, right? And if I kept getting weird answers, I would keep asking. Then I would come back and I would set up objectives for myself and my department. They then would set up objectives individually, and I required reviews every quarter of those objectives. Plus, we had weekly meetings, and I had a big whiteboard in my office where we put all the objectives for the quarter, and we would say, okay, what are you doing this week on the objectives? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Right? It kept you on course. And my rule on this was when I would sit down for those quarterly reviews, which would then link into the annual review, my annual reviews took 15 minutes because it was just a formality. They already knew what was on the review, right? Because we talked about it all year. So they would come in and say, okay, I'm giving you out 4 out of 5. There's these different things that we need to work on for next year. And they go, yeah, no, I get it, right? If your employees go into that review and everything you tell them is a complete surprise, you've failed as a manager. Bottom line, I can't make that any simpler than that, right? That accountability piece of it needs to be linked, and they need to understand what they're being measured upon. And if that's constantly changing, oh my goodness, are you going to create stress?
Yeah, and you know, the second one down here under consistency is performance measurement, and you know, so much of what I focus on in performance measurement is not just process performance, right, but also the behaviors and the actions that are being taken. So starting to design performance measurement around what we refer to as critical behaviors. There are critical behaviors that must be witnessed to indicate that we are on the right trajectory to hit the KPI, and the KPI is an indicator that we are hitting the larger scale goal. So if the large scale goal is no recalls, right? There's a lot of elements that come into play there. So what are the KPIs that we need to look at that show that we're on the right track? But even before that, what are the behaviors that are necessary to see those things happen? So that's, so looking at performance measurement from that psychological, sociological viewpoint of the specific behaviors that we need to see happen.
Right. And again, guys, just to reemphasize this, right? Technical skills, people skills, right? Most of our conversation that we're having right now is on the people side of things, right? Of how you execute against these and make these things successful, right? So that's super important. Consistency, oh my goodness, right? There's nothing worse than working for a manager who's constantly changing their mind, right? I mean, right? It's chaos, absolute chaos. And anybody who's been in that position knows exactly what I'm talking about. So the next one is an important one, is adaptability, right? There's this, what's the best way to start on this? So one of the things that I would always teach in creating good food safety and quality systems, Austin, is that if you can write a document, a procedure, a work instruction, or whatever that covers 80% of what happens, that's a really good procedure. And people are probably listening to me say that and say, well, hold on a minute, shouldn't it be 100%? No, you're never going to have 100%. And if you try and write 100%, you're going to have a 40-page document, right, of every contingency and everything that can go wrong. And guess what? It's still going to miss stuff, right? What people need to understand is what we're talking about here today is the behavior side of things. If something happens that's weird, go get your boss. If your boss doesn't know what to do, he'll get his boss, right, et cetera, et cetera. So that you just don't shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's not covered in the procedure. A good example of this is GMPs. I worked for a company which had it was like a 40-page document on proper GMPs. And every little thing in there was very, very specific things. You can't do this, and they would give examples of things. Well, in this company, it had become a game on the floor with the workers where they would try and find loopholes in the GMPs. Then you would have to go and write something else to cover that loophole. And the example for that was false fingernails, right? Obviously, we don't want false fingernails in a GMP area. And there was an employee who had some on, and I talked with her about it. I'm like, well, you can't have these. And she goes, oh, no. These are bonded nails. They don't come off. I'm like, oh, okay. let me look at that. So I went and did some research and actually called some beauty salons. And they said, oh yeah, you can soak those in acetone and then the adhesive comes off and we can do what we need to do. So they do come off. So I thought about it and I came this close, Austin, to rewriting the GMPs to include bonded nails and then take that document out on the floor and say, now you can't do that, right? What a dumb idea, right? But what I realized is that what's the objective, right? The objective is to keep foreign material out of the product, right? That's what we want everybody to understand. The permutations for that are limitless. How do we build that in so that we can control that? So I cut that document way, way, way down. I probably cut 60% of that document out and retrained everybody on that and say, hey guys, listen, we wear hairnets for a reason. We do all these things for a reason. If there's something that could potentially get in the product, it's not allowed. Guess what? I didn't have to rewrite the GMPs again because now we had a rule in place that people could understand and execute against, and it wasn't a game, right? We taught them what was needed, and then we created adaptability in the documentation to reflect that.
Yeah. And moving to that last one there, the change in crisis management. I mean, agility is really reflected in those situations and those scenarios, because here's a situation that is not the daily grind, right? This is not, when I punched in yesterday and did my day-to-day tasks, and now we have a recall on Tuesday. Well, then I need to be agile and have the ability to shift to the new demand, which is now how do we handle the recall? So built, because there's so many, organizations that say, well, our people do the same thing every day. And it's like, right, until they don't.
Right. Right. Well, and here's a cold hard truth coming from somebody who has been through the pain of this. I have managed class 1 recalls for serious issues. And guess what? They never, ever go the way you think they're going to go. You can train and plan and put everything in place, but it's not going to happen, right? So again, the 80-20 rule, right? If you can have people understanding what they need to do 80% of the time and the other 20% management is going to help out with what needs to be done, perfect, right? Because when do recalls happen? They happen on Friday, December 23rd at 4 p.m. Everybody's on vacation and you get the call from FDA, right? Well, now what do you do, right? Everybody on your procedure is out of pocket, right? They're on planes, they're in the Caribbean, whatever. And how do you manage that, right? Guaranteed it's going to happen. It's not going to go the way. So you have to be adaptable.
Yeah. So yeah, and it brings us to our final one, which is, hazards and risk awareness, which once again, for this audience, this is not groundbreaking new stuff here. This is stuff that a lot of everybody on this call is very familiar with.
Absolutely. And I mean, so part of this with hazard risk analysis is keeping up to date. One of my rules was I will always know more than who's coming in to visit me, right? So if I was going through a GFSI audit, I understood that standard better than the auditor. That way, if things were going in the direction that I didn't agree with, we could have a conversation because we were speaking the same language. It's true with the CFR. It's true with FSMA. It's true with all these things that we're talking about. You have to understand these things, right? And again, food safety is not a point of competition. And we have a group on Locals, which is free, right? You can join, and Renee will put the link in here for this. Every week, 2 or 3 times a week, I will post recalls and information out there, and you can keep up to speed on what's going on. Because the bottom line on this with risk awareness is you have to keep up to date, right? You have to know what's going on out there because the emerging risks and things are changing all the time. And you need to be able to understand those and manage risk appropriately in your company. You may think you have the most bulletproof product in the world. Well, guess what? At some point, you're going to realize you don't. There's no such thing as a bulletproof product. Things are going to happen. So please join Locals and get the information directly from me on what I see out there as important, right? So hopefully this is kind of an overarching theme with this as well, is that, right, there's a whole lot of information out there and your crow can get blown relative to the epistemology of this, right? You just get overwhelmed, right? Trying to eat the elephant. So work with other people to help you, right? That's part of the reason why you're here, is to get ideas around how to do this. So don't think you have to do this all on your own. What are those risks and trends that are coming up? And again, realize, and this kind of sits over all this, right? Regulatory compliance is the bare minimum, right?
Mhm.
That's not the standard, right? That's where you start, right? If you want an excellent company who is managing these things, you have to go far beyond that, right? And from the food safety realm, if you're on this call, you're probably one of the key people who's going to help lead that charge and teach the organization what they need to know.
Yeah, and the second one, that employee engagement, creating these engaged employees that really, the overall goal of food safety culture, my idea is prevention, as being proactive as opposed to reactive to these issues, and the more that we can engage employees to be focusing on food safety first and foremost is the primary function of their job, the more likely we are to have this culture that is preventative as opposed to reactionary.
Yeah, exactly right. We all struggle to move from corrective to preventive actions, right? And the more we do that, the better off we're going to be. So getting out and learning more about these things, sometimes too, a lot of these things face to face is a better way to do it. Anybody on this call who's been through PCQI training, you go to the class and let's say 20 or 30 people in that class from all kinds of different industries doing things completely different than what you do. And you learn, right? Now you see that new perspective on how they're managing risk in those areas. And when you go back to your company, your food safety plans become better as a result of that. And I would be remiss if we didn't go through this conversation without mentioning Austin's course that's coming up. So let's talk about that a little bit relative to that, please.
Oh, sure. So yeah, we my company Sage Media partnered up with the Ohio State University and the Center for Foodborne Illness Research and Prevention, and created a day-long. We've been working on this for about 18 months now. A day-long food safety culture design. Food safety culture design workshop. So we're going to be doing the inaugural event as an in-person event out at IAFP in Pittsburgh. So it'll be on August 4th, which is the day after IAFP wraps up. But really, the purpose of the curriculum was to do exactly what we're talking about today. Go from the beginning of what exactly is food safety culture, a little bit about how it ties into organizational culture and how all of that, what that all means, and then how to assess the current state and then design a plan by the end of the day to move forward so that you have some short-term, some mid-term, and some long-term goals to go out and start to execute to improve food safety culture, but to pick those specific things, right? So that, pick those first few bites of the elephant and go out and move forward. So we're going to be doing that class live out at the IAFP conference. And then we have options for virtual because there's obviously a global audience that would be that would benefit from the course. And so we'll be running virtual dates as well. So I think, Renee has the link to that. And so if any of those virtual dates work, then you can sign up for that as well.
Excellent. Yeah. So the link from Renee is in the chat. Thank you, Renee. And part of that, again, right, is what I like about this, which is smart, is piggybacking on the conference, right? So now you don't have to worry about travel costs. So you're already there at the conference, right? All you have to do is stay another night in a hotel, and that the face-to-face interaction with the other people in the class is worth the price alone, right? So now you get these new perspectives. And that's part of the reason why you're here on the chat too. You're here to get other perspectives, right? Now, so not only my or Austin's perspectives, but the amazing comments that we've had here in the chat, right? So, Jennifer, I would have loved, right, to have talked more about these as well too, but thank you guys. Amazing, amazing comments. So again, right, food safety is not one person who's doing these type of things. It's a group effort, and work with and find other people who can help you do these things. It's what we're all here for. And so again, I'd like to thank you for joining us here on this Friday, July 1st, to talk about this topic going into this long holiday weekend. I know I'm going to be having some fun this weekend, so looking forward to it as well, right? So part of growth and improving things like this is working, but also stepping away, right? And as we all know, during those downtimes when you're driving in a car or flying on a plane, things come to you, right? You start thinking about stuff from a new perspective, and that's how things grow. That's how things improve. So I encourage that. I know Austin does as well too. So Thank you again for joining us. And we'll be back here next Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat with our next guest. And so Austin, man, I love having you on the show. It aligns so well with everything. And I'm really glad to have you as a friend. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to be here. I always love talking about this stuff.
Me too. All right. So everybody have a great time. Enjoy your weekend. And we will see you back here next Friday. Have a good one.
See you next week.